It's a pleasure today to introduce our two webinar speakers, Dr. Kristen Johannes from the Ocean Discovery League at Scripps, and Dr. Johanna Weston from the Hole Oceanographic Institution, and they're going to enlighten us with some interesting information and discoveries about the deep sea. So, excellent. Let's take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. Just to note that the Ocean Discovery League is a nonprofit research entity separate from Scripps. And so I'm very lucky today to be able to present work that I started at Scripps while I was a student there, and that I've been able to further develop at the Ocean Discovery League and also through the auspices of the COBRA ECR Accelerator Stipend Program. So I'll be talking about the seafloor observation scenario exploration tool and this idea of using dynamic suitability modeling to expand seafloor observation. And just to manage some audience expectations, this work is less about my deep sea discoveries and more about setting people up to make their own deep sea discoveries. Can everyone hear me okay? So really, we're working towards a global goal of accelerating seafloor observation and learning about the deep ocean and seafloor through visual observation specifically. So seeing these environments via images or video footage is critical here, because when we have the opportunity to observe the deep seafloor, we invariably discover new species, habitats, and ecosystems, and refine our understanding of the Earth systems, including oceanographic, geochemical, and biological processes. And I think you'll hear a little more about those aspects of exploration from Johanna after my talk. Our exploration and observation also helps to inform and to communicate plans for deep sea stewardship, management, and protection. So far, there's been very little direct seafloor observation relative to the total global area of the seafloor. And for the past 2 years, I've been working with the Ocean Discovery League to pull together a historical record of where observation activities have taken place globally. And this is all from deep submergence and other technology like drop cameras and landers, metadata from these activities that we've been able to map onto the global seafloor. And from this record, we can see that observation has been uneven in a number of important ways. First, it's been conducted by relatively wealthy nations. You can see a few different colors of points on this map, and these colors reflect countries responsible for observational research efforts. The biggest players here being the US, Japan, and New Zealand. We can also see that observation is conducted in relatively coastal areas. About 80% of visual observation activities in our records are within countries' 200 nautical mile EEZ areas. And in looking at these records, we quickly discovered that current exploration isn't representative of either the global deep seafloor itself or the goals of global stakeholders and would-be participants in ocean observation and exploration. The focus on coastal regions of mostly the global north really fails to reflect the goals and priorities of all nations and interests in the deep ocean. And so I want to focus the rest of my talk today on expanding participation in exploration. In 2022, as you might know, the Ocean Discovery League released the results of a global deep sea capacity assessment. And this provided a multifaceted picture of deep sea research interests, goals, and technical and human capacity for 186 geographical areas. The assessment included key access metrics for resources like infrastructure, funding, data, expertise, deep sea technology, and vessels. And they found that areas surveyed in the assessment varied widely in both their stakeholder interest and capacity for deep sea research. Different areas had unique combinations of deep sea priorities, expertise, and capacity. and different resource access needs. This complexity really demands some flexible stakeholder and rights holder-driven strategies for seafloor exploration and research activities, and these need to be responsive to area-specific priorities. And so I wanted to lean into this need for flexible strategies in the case of seafloor exploration and to help stakeholders figure out where the best locations for their activities might be, given area-specific priorities and community goals. So to do this, I developed a dynamic web-based seafloor observation scenario exploration tool. It's built using a series of global map layers and functions as a suitability interface that updates in real time. And you may or may not have done your own suitability modeling. The approach tends to have a pretty wide range of applications. We often see site suitability in areas like urban planning, where to place a building. We also see it in a lot of ocean contexts, for example, habitat suitability for specific species assemblages. And it's used very frequently in ocean use management. So the planning of marine protected areas, resource extraction activities, fisheries, etc. And in all of these cases, the goal is to combine multiple relevant considerations and sources of information to determine the best area to carry out different activities or to expect specific organisms or ecosystems. And in the suitability tool I'm going to show you today, users can select and adjust the importance of different considerations like depth ranges, coastal proximity, and vessel traffic based on their own priorities. So we'll walk through the tool in a moment, but it uses these considerations to ultimately generate a heat map of regions that fit the established priorities. And when users change their priorities, this heat map changes to reflect new suitable or unsuitable areas to explore. And so in that sense is dynamic. So let's dive in. The tool starts with a series of information layers, and you can choose to use or ignore each layer based on your goals and constraints. The text might be a little small, but currently these layers include seafloor depth zone, previous seafloor exploration activity, proximity to coastal exclusive economic zones and extended continental shelf areas, marine protected areas, seabed lithology, geomorphology features, so you can pick your favorite one you shared in the breakout room, and the density of global vessel traffic routes. And I'm going to walk us through an example in the Gulf of Guinea region, and I've zoomed into that area of interest here. And we will see this in action. So in our scenario, we chose seafloor depth, density of previous exploration activity, jurisdictional areas, the EEZ and extended continental shelf that these countries have jurisdiction over, and the density of global vessel traffic. Once you've chosen which information layers you want to use, you can adjust how important each one is based on your priorities, and you do this by assigning a percent value. So you can see each of those labeled layers has a different percent on the right-hand side of the diagram. So for example, if you're severely limited by depth-specific technology, you may want to make the seafloor depth layer more important than the others, and I've set it to determine 40% of our suitability estimate. You can also adjust the way in which specific depth ranges are important to your planning. So for example, if you have access to depth-limited tools and technology, you can use the sliders to place more weight on certain depth ranges, and that's done by using a higher number on the slider, and place less relative weight on others with lower numbers. Here we're accounting for technology that can descend to 4,000 meters, so we've weighted depth ranges deeper than that as low suitability and weighted ranges that our technology can access as high suitability. And so we can make similar adjustments to each of our chosen layers. I've chosen to prioritize, for example, areas with little to no previous exploration, and I use the density of activity sliders to reflect that. Then I selected to keep my activity mostly within EEZ and extended continental shelf regions. And finally, I chose to prioritize areas with low vessel traffic. And once I have all of these things in place, I can hit run on my suitability model. And when you run the tool, it reflects your priorities across the entire global ocean. So this is a global coverage tool. But here we're really just interested in the Gulf of Guinea as our area of interest. You also have the option to choose your own color ramp. And in this case, I've chosen red to reflect low suitability and green to reflect higher suitability areas. And once you've zoomed into your area of interest, you can then draw a custom shape around it. And this user-defined area is then summarized in a pie chart, which you'll see in a sec, that gives the percent of seafloor in that area with different levels of suitability, given the priorities you input into the model. So within this pie chart, for example, 78% of the area we drew has very high suitability, reflected in shades of dark green. And in this way, we can get an immediate snapshot of the regions of interest and how they line up with seafloor exploration priorities. And you can also, if you have the capability of analyzing GIS layers yourself, download this suitability layer and use it offline so you don't depend on the tool itself. So this tool is pretty powerful. It presents a lot of data and options. And I think this can feel a little overwhelming on first exposure, especially when you don't have the person who created it walking you through it. And I was able to use a COBRA ECR accelerator stipend to both add additional data layers to the tool and, more importantly, to create a user guide for the tool. And I'm just giving you a whirlwind scroll through the guide, which I developed as a story map. And it gives important background and motivation, and critically, it walks people through both the data layers and where they come from, and how to use the interface step by step. It also links up with a paper we published last year, and I'll share all of the links to everything in a minute if you want to access it yourself. Okay. Before I share where to get a hold of all of these different tools that I ran through, I just want to give some acknowledgements to my initial committee, Katie Croft-Bell, Judy Gobin, and Greg Rouse, who helped make this really successful master's thesis project for me several years ago. And my current sources of feedback, Lisa Levin and the Levin Lab here at Scripps, and also Keith Van Graafland and Kevin Butler, who are at Esri, who helped me implement this using GIS web tools and app development. I've benefited hugely from being part of DEUCE and DOERS, the early career group within DEUCE, and especially the Habitat Mapping Working Group. And as well, of course, big shout out to the COBRA early career research programs, and especially this accelerator stipend program, which gave me the opportunity to really put some time in and muscle behind making this guide and improving this tool. So if you'd like to try it yourself, I have several shortened links. I will drop them into the chat as soon as I stop screen sharing, and I welcome any feedback that you have for this tool. I think I still have another minute left, so if everyone is okay with me dropping these links in later, I'll also just mention that I'm actively working on adding to this tool. The next data layers that I'd like to be able to add have to do with human activities such as mining exploration areas and FAO fishing areas, and also some additional sediment thickness information and productivity variables for the seafloor. So on that note, if you have any high resolution seafloor data that you are willing to share, I would love to talk more about that as well. And with that, I think I'm at time, and I will pass the baton over to Johanna to talk about her actual deep sea discoveries. Thank you.
Thanks. That was really amazing. I've heard a little bit about the tool, so it was great to hear even more about it.
Thanks,
So I will share the screen. So hi, I'm Johanna. I have benefited greatly from COBRA, both as participating 2023 masterclass, as well as I received a research accelerator, and I'm currently the ECR rep on the executive committee. So if you have like early career things that you think we should be handling more, I'm happy to take that feedback and pass it up. But I'm really excited here today to talk about one of my new favorite animals, a sargassum eating isopod that comes from some of the deepest parts of the ocean. It's also a really new talk with first time I'm really presenting this stuff, so hopefully it all goes without a hitch. But even though we're all excited about the deep sea, just want to start by really grounding us into that the Earth is this deep ocean planet. And I want to drop in this amazing map with the Spillhouse projection of really seeing the ocean in a one ocean view. And so the black is going to be all the continents. And then we can see the ocean gets really deep very quickly. And so any of that darker brown near the shelf is largely at the bathyal zone from about 1,000 to 3,000 meters, making up about 8% of the seafloor. And then most of our planet is that light brown representing the abyssal zone from 3,000 to 6,000 meters, or over 50 or about 54% of the planet. And then my favorite depth to be working at is the hadal zone, and that's everything in blue, so from 6,000 to nearly 11,000 meters. So just think about, I think it's just important to remember that we're on this deep ocean planet, and it is extraordinarily deep. So to focus in a little bit on my favorite features, the hadal zone, as you can see from this map, that they're kind of disjunct and splotted across the seafloor. And even though it's a zone from 6 to 11,000 meters, it's really made up of 45 or 47 different unique ecosystems. And each one of those features is shaped by a variety of different factors, from what's the overlying primary productivity to how deep does it actually get, how was it formed. And these features are formed in a number of different ways, with the most common ones being subduction, so one plate gets submerged under another. And there's some of my favorite places, and one that we'll focus on today is Puerto Rico Trench. But some really unique ones are South Sandwich Trench, which is the only sub-zero, or one of the few sub-zero trenches. Mariana Trench, that holds our deepest point on the planet, Challenger Deep. And a really unique one is Peru Chile Trench. That's a whole different talk. But there's also troughs, like the North Pacific Trough, covers a pretty wide area, even though it's not super deep, so kind of hill-like versus inverted mountain ranges like trenches. And then fracture zones and trench faults that are kind of when the plate gets sort of split apart. And so there's a really special one called Dynamitina Fracture Zone. But just kind of naming these to highlight that they're each really unique. And we think about the hadal environment, it's often described as really extreme, so super low temperatures from about 1 to 2.5 C, even though there's some that are below freezing. Going down there, the animals and our technology have to survive increasingly high pressure, which has some unique adaptations with a lot of piezophilic microbes, as well as some unique molecules to help stabilize cells. It's usually defined by very low food supply, so about 1% of what's happening in the at the top is making its way down, either in large food packets like a carcass that sinks down, or coming down as marine snow. And places in these subduction trenches have really high seismic activity, so there's constantly landslides essentially that are happening. And with this terminology of extremeness, it tends to have this thought that once it was maybe too extreme for life to exist, and we're always kind of combating against that, and too distant for that remoteness is going to protect it from both us, any influence, but also hinder us from being able to get there. And so since 1948, and this date becomes important later, it's really this hotspot for endemic biodiversity. And so here's just a nice video of some of my favorite animals that are living down there, and this is in the San Cristobal Trench, of multiple species of amphipods, including those really big white ones called Alicella gigantea, which is the largest amphipod in the world. And all these organisms are able to thrive in this extreme environment. And remoteness is also not a complete barrier, not for humans, where we've got an increasing number of technologies, starting with just to give widespread, starting with the Trieste that went down to Challenger Deep, to new techs like limiting factor, which is a full ocean depth human submersible. But with that barrier, we're able to access it better, but we're also learning that these really deep places are polluted with, for example, high accumulation of persistent organic pollutants. And so that depth isn't stopping things from being there. And it's also not stopping us from putting things into these really deep places. Like, for example, in the 70s to 1983, part of Puerto Rico Trench was a dumping ground for pharmaceutical waste. And so in my research, I really think about the animals that live there and how the biodiversity and connection, either between species, their environment, populations, they shape the ecosystem resilience, especially in these really deep features. So I ask a lot of questions about diversity and distribution, environmental drivers of species, populations, communities, and also the remoteness protecting against anthropogenic impacts. And generally, most of my PhD work was using landers with baited traps in order to collect thousands of amphipods at a time. So you can see that in the screen, and then that had been collected, but also in this still from a video that it's a lot of amphipods in the Atacama Trench eating mackerel bait. But there's two things I had in my PhD that I saw that had kind of jolted a like, whoa, what is going on here? And one is this animal that had these amazing paddles and kind of spun itself down onto the seafloor in this video. And it was like, whoa, that animal, which ends up being an isopod, is really cool. And also, when I was at the Puerto Rico Trench, watching video from the bottom, there was this sargassum that just like rolled across the screen, kind of like a tumbleweed. And that together was like, okay, there's way more diversity. And there are these huge amounts of, it was just a juxtaposition in the amount of food that was potentially down there. So come to this amazing video that as I entered my postdoc, there was a cruise to, so Alvin had recently got, in 2022, had got upgraded from 4,000 to a new depth capability of 6,500 meters. And there were science verification trials, the Puerto Rico Trench. And on one of these dives, collected an amazing video of this paddle swimming isopod that's about the size of your palm, carrying what is bigger than its body of sargassum. And so its head's actually down towards the seafloor. It's got those really long antennae, and its butt's up in the air. And like, I was just in awe of this video because it all of a sudden combined these two things that I had seen previously. This amazing isopod, a similar species likely in the Puerto Rico or in the Peru-Chile Trench, and then that sargassum rolling across the Puerto Rico Trench. And so then flooded with questions of like, what species is this? What is its distribution? Is it actually eating sargassum? How is it eating sargassum? Where is it taking sargassum? How much sargassum is on the seafloor? And then what are the implications when there's a lot of discussion about sinking macroalgae for carbon sequestration? And so I'm really excited that we recently had a paper published on this in Royal Society's Proceedings B. And so this is diving into an integrative approach to understanding the who, what, and why stemming from that video and two of the individuals that we collected. So I really want to say my thanks to a really strong team, including my two co-lead authors, Logan Peoples and Mackenzie Geringer. And so with that, we ended up seeing a really wide, expansive distribution of this species across the sargassum belt. So of course, these two cruises, it was two different legs, one in the Puerto Rico Trench and then one in the Mid-Cayman Spreading Center. And so in those yellow points, you see that we saw 6 dives where we've ended up seeing 32 distinct individuals. Of those 32 individuals, 19 of them were actually carrying sargassum, very similar to that video that we just watched. And when we looked at the association of sargassum on the seafloor, and then when we observed these isopods, there's a pretty clear linkage of that there was a lot of sargassum that was either just present on the seafloor, or it was moving across the seafloor with the currents, and it was building up either on rocks, maybe on trash as well. But the sargassum piles are abundantly present on the seafloor, and then there's a lot of linkage between seeing isopods and seeing the sargassum there. So we were able to suction sample 2 individuals, and through an integrative approach, we learned that the species is actually not new, but it was originally collected. It's named Bathyposaurus nibeluni, and it was collected during that 1948 Swedish expedition to the Puerto Rico Trench, which is when we realized like, life is able to survive in these deep depths. And so this is a screenshot from its description paper. In total, they collected 10 individuals with trawl. And here, that image kind of shows that there's a lot of loss of appendages, and these are not in the greatest of shape. And you don't even get a sense of what is this organism doing. But there was also suggestion in looking, Dahl ended up looking in its stomach and seeing that it was potentially eating, or found a lot of evidence of eating macroalgae. And then the species was again spotted in a sargassum bait experiment, that it came to the sargassum that was out being baited on a lander, and then took it, and then in still footage, got to see that it was moving around, but didn't see it in its like full glory of swimming. And so what we were able to do with 2 specimens that were in pretty good condition, because they weren't, they were just collected with the slurp, able to do a bit of a redescription and create a virtual specimen by micro CT work. And so these two specimens came from just shy of 6,000 meters. And from that, got to see really specific characteristics that they have these two strong paddles. Their seventh leg is actually these really tiny paddles. But then got to understand really clearly how it might be able to hold and then break down to the sargassum. So in that figure B, is they've got a really strong molar in order to have grinding. And then in their hand, they're basically clutching it with a few spines that are helping it kind of stay connected. We're also did DNA barcoding and just found that it fits really nicely within its subfamily, with its nearest neighbor being Paraposaurus giganteus, which is also a pretty large isopod. But it was really nice that DNA barcoding placed it really closely with its kind of nearest neighbor. The rest of the family's a little bit of a mess, but that's okay. We also then wanted to understand how is this really make sure that we understood that it is eating sargassum and also how it's eating that sargassum. And we found out that it's a strong herbivore that has a distinct gut microbiome. And so we were able to do gut content metagenomic shotgun sequencing, and we characterized the microbial community and its functional potential. So with that, we got a nice check that it was eating, that the macroalgae in the stomach was this Sargassum fluoritans 3, which is one of the holopelagic and common species that's at the surface. We found that there was low diversity in taxa with only 4 abundant microbes that made up about 95% of the community. And of those, they were really part of a deep piezophilic clade, that they were similar to other deep sea gut microbiome species that have been found in fish and amphipods, but it was really a distinct lineage next to those. And that really got us really excited to understand, probably was the most exciting part of the story. So we dug a little deeper into the functional characteristics and found that it's highly adapted to capitalize on that recalcium sargassum. So macroalgae has a lot of polysaccharides, tough to break down, and so it's got that grinding molar, but then the gut microbiome really helps out. And those 4 dominant bacteria, they have a number of different genes that really are working on degrading those polysaccharides. And then also sargassum is kind of imbalanced and has a lot more carbon, has a high carbon, low amount of nitrogen. And what's really interesting is that the 3 most common bacteria, they had nitrogenase NIF operons, so suggesting that there is some nitrogen fixation that's going on in order to help compensate for that low amount of nitrogen. And this isn't the only, this isn't novel. It is novel for the deep sea, but it's not novel in the span of the world. So there are nitrogen fixing bacteria, like from wood-eating termites, as well as leafcutter ants. Oh, and important to say that these species of bacteria, their similar counterparts in other deep sea organisms don't have this NIF operon present. So to zoom back up, we really focus deep on this organism, but looking at it in this bigger picture, which is what I think makes this species so special, is that it's this fast it really is showing a direct trophic link of sargassum between the surface and the deep ocean. So sargassum was readily present on the surface. When we're looking at this map from NOAA and climate data, show that it's really abundant across the Atlantic Ocean into the Caribbean and then up to the Sargasso Sea. And so we think about it coming onto beaches, but we're thinking less about it falling to the seafloor. But it does seem to drop down pretty quickly, with estimates about 3 kilometers a day. So essentially it's 2 deep parts of Puerto Rico Trench. That's a 2-day span. So it's once it starts sinking, it sinks really quickly. And there are other organisms, including this isopod, that do consume sargassum. And so really providing some concrete evidence that sargassum is this food fall, important food fall for this region. So in the age of climate change, there seems to be an increase of the presence of the holopelagic sargassum, which is a nuisance on beaches. And we also have a real conversation about should we, or thoughts of seeking seaweed for carbon sequestration. So I think future work really needs to think about now that we know that organisms are really using it down there, what is the flux of sargassum in a real quantitative way? So how, like other big food falls, how important is that to the deep ocean food web? And then in conversations about sinking seaweed, what are those downstream implications, knowing that these are non-empty ecosystems? So I hope this has been an exciting look and a strong illustration of this tightly evolved linkage between the surface and the ocean floor. So just ending on another great video of this isopod, this one's actually individual is carrying a piece of algae that's bigger than itself. Boop.
Thank you to both Kristen and Johanna.